Hello, everybody. I trust that you guys are well and really excited this week to start our life group discussions on our new preaching series through the book of Genesis. And it's going to be an amazing journey to see how things God intended it from the beginning. And we're praying that as we go through this, God will work in our hearts and help us as a people together to understand His good plan for His creation through His Son, Jesus Christ. And so before we start today's one, just a couple of things for us to be aware of and so that you can know what's happening in the life of the church. The first thing is that we have our family day that is happening on the 17th of March. That's Sunday, the 17th of March. And it's a time of fellowship with the life groups. And we encourage you also to invite others who aren't in life groups to join us. For after the service, we'll be out here on the grounds just enjoying a picnic, meals, braais together, spending some time together. But also on that morning, we're going to be welcoming in some new folk into the church. We're going to be doing some water baptisms, and also we are going to be doing some baby dedication. So if there are people in your groups or others that you know of that want to be water baptized and also want to dedicate their babies, please send through the information to the office and complete the Google form so that we can prepare for that. The second thing is last week we shared about our plans to upgrade our kids facility. And I pray that each one of you have given some thought and prayer to that, and that you see that what we're wanting to do there is to reach more kids and parents with the gospel. And so I just want to put up the banking details so that you can see it's going to be via our ImpoPomo account, and the references for kids ministry facility upgrade. So as you've prayed, I ask you to continue to give into this, or if you know of corporates that would be able to give into this, there will be tax certificates given to them for a deduction for donations over 10,000 Rand. So please look at that. And then lastly, we have our Easter services here at North Point, Good Friday, 9 a.m. and Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, also at 9 a.m. So invite friends, family. We will preach the good news of Jesus Christ, and we will also celebrate it together on that weekend. So guys, like I said, we're going through Genesis, and we're starting this week with an intro into the book. And maybe a good thing to do is to pause this video now and just read the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 1. That's Genesis 1, verses 1 to 3. You can pause now and read that. Awesome. Now that you have done that, you'll see that the book of Genesis is the book of beginnings. That's what the word actually means, origins, the start of something. And what we have in Genesis is we have a historical narrative, a historical story of events that actually happened, and that was written by Moses to the people of Israel as they were on the verge of entering the promised land. And that's the context of why this book was written. It's part of the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, written together as a unit, as part of the law of God, and it was given to God's people. God's people that He had started, that were in a land of exile, where had been under enslavement for 430 years, and were now coming out into the desert and about to enter into their promised land. It was written by Moses, handed over to Joshua to be able to tell the people to remember the God that they're serving, remember His law, remember that you can trust in His good promises and His faithfulness. And so it was written that the people of God would remember God, who is the creator of all things, who called them, who saved them, who is the one who wants them to walk in His ways and in accordance with His plan. And so when we look at it, it's a historical narrative. It is not a science textbook, even though it does not contradict science. And when we keep that in mind, now we understand how we approach Genesis, and we understand what is God's heart and His main thing that He wants to communicate to the people of Israel, and ultimately to us through this book. And when we look at this book, one of the things we look at from the beginning, when we see God's good creation, and we look at the end of Genesis, which ends with the story of Joseph, and how God says to him, or how Joseph says to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And so we get to see God's good creation. We get to see that God's good plan will continue, and even what is meant by evil, God will use it still to fulfill his good plan for his creation. And so it's important that when we look at the book of Genesis, we remember this main theme, this main idea across the book, that God demonstrates his plan for good for his creation, and that it will continue through his seed in his timing, even in the midst of sin, so that his people will continue to trust and obey him. Let me say that again. God demonstrates his plan for the good of his creation, and that it will continue through his seed in his timing, even in the midst of sin and evil, so that people will continue to trust and obey him. And so as we've looked at this book, you might be wondering, why are we preaching through the book of Genesis? Why preach through this book now? Why study it? What contribution does it have to the Bible? What will we miss if we don't have this book? What will we gain by going through this book? And I think what's important for us is to remember a couple of things. Here's some reasons why we're going through the book of Genesis. Firstly, it shows us that God is the creator and initiator of all things. Everything starts with God, and God has no beginning, but everything starts with him. All of creation, including ourselves, have been created by God in his image to glorify him. It also shows God's intention for all creation from its inception, from its start. God had an intention and a plan for good for his creation, for people to be his image bearers, for there to be multiplication and increase, for them to submit to him ultimately. Genesis also sets in place the foundations and the first principles for all of creation and God's created order. It sets the pattern. What did God intend? What is the first principles? What is God thinking about when he made everything in his created order? And there was order. It also shows us how the created order that God brought about was messed up, was interrupted, was disrupted by sin. It shows sin and its implications and its severity. And it's important that we understand that for all of life as we're processing things in life. It shows God's plan to redeem and to restore all creation. There's hints and there's pointers already in the book of Genesis that God has a plan through his seed, through ultimately pointing to Christ, to restore and redeem all of creation. A plan which is slow, which is intentional, and in accordance with God's will and his way. And so if we don't have this book of Genesis, what we miss is that we could have our frame of reference. Our starting point will be wrong to interpret life and everything else. And we don't want to have a frame of reference that's off course, that is the wrong starting point. And our foundations won't be strong in understanding that. So Genesis gives us the right frame of reference. Where does it all start? What happened? Why are we here now? And it shows us that it started with God. And if we don't have that, we miss everything and we won't be able to interpret life and everything that's happening around it. What we also gain from Genesis is the clarity of God's will from the beginning. It helps us to understand the rest of God's story, the rest of his will and his plan, and why things happen the way that it is. Why doesn't it happen quicker? Why does it happen in this way, through generations, through people, through the nation of Israel, through sinners who don't deserve it? Why does God bring judgment but also extend mercy? All of these things help us to be able to understand how God works, and his ways are not like ours. And then it compels us to trust and obey God, to be patient, to worship him, because his plan is perfect and he's working it in exactly the right timing. So here's a couple of questions for you to chat through in your life groups. Just two of them. Firstly, how would you describe your understanding of God's plan from the beginning? If you had to just think about it, how would you describe your understanding of God's plan from the beginning? Is it great? Is it good? Is it fair? Is it okay? Is it bad? Maybe I don't understand. Maybe you don't understand how everything started from the beginning. And it's important we do this. We can't just underestimate this. How would you describe your understanding of God's plan from the beginning? And if it is not great, that's also okay, because Genesis is going to help us with that. Second question for you guys to discuss is, what is your frame of reference to process things in life? And I'm talking here about things like your identity, your sexuality, your self-worth, your marriage, your singleness. What is your frame of reference to process the real things in your life? And does the story of Genesis feature in that processing at all? Does the story of Genesis feature there at all in how you process things in life? That's an important question to answer, because from there you begin to see how, when we understand how we've been made and what God's intention was from the beginning and how sin messed that up, we begin to see how this helps us to process what happens in our life now, our identity, our sexuality, our marriages, our singleness, and all of the other things that may happen in our lives, even the things that happen externally in the world around us. And so, does the story of Genesis feature in you processing the things in your life personally and the things that are happening around you? I pray that your discussions are fruitful, and even as we move into the book of Genesis, they will become clearer, the answers to these questions. God bless you, and I pray that your time together as a group is awesome, meaningful, lots of fun, and helps you to grow. God bless you.